Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we are going all the way back to July of 2016 for kind of one of the old school hodgepodge episodes, episode number 54, or really it was 054. Of course, I had the leading zeros back in the day. This was an episode where it was a little bit of everything. It was talking about prep for an upcoming Oregon coast ride. It was also a bit of talk about the Pedalshift guide to the C&O, which was just getting built that particular summer. And then, of course, some gear talk on my Schwalbe Marathon tires and what I was considering my perfect bike touring tent. So this is a nice kind of old school episode for those of you that maybe didn't get a chance to listen to it back in its first run. Hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we're in the heart of summer, the heart of touring season. I probably say that a lot during this time of year. I am fresh back from yet another crazy bit of travel. I was in Oklahoma doing a little bit of a dog pickup. We ended up adopting a new little pug. Her name is Belle Star, and she is probably going to be making a racket this entire podcast, so apologies for that. Belle Star, if you know anything about Oklahoma or that portion of the country, she was the queen of the Oklahoma Outlaws, and she's been quite an addition to our little family here. So, interesting. She is, unlike Mookie, who you've been introduced to in past episodes, she is a lot more chill. And I have a funny feeling I may be grooming her for a future bike tour. So we'll see. We'll see what she has to say about that. But I think that she'll be able to handle it a little bit better than Mr. Anxiety over there in the corner. We've got a ton of stuff on this episode of the podcast, but I wanted to open up by making sure that everybody who's signed up for the newsletter is signed up for the newsletter. And here's why. I realized that with the July bonus podcast, yes, that's right, you heard bonus podcast, people who sign up for the newsletter get a bonus podcast. I realized that that was actually a much longer version than I usually typically do. And I thought, it would probably be pretty good if anybody digs this show that they actually are signed up to make sure that they get that extra podcast. So make sure that you do that over at pedalshift.net. You can do that almost anywhere on the website. There's like a little bar at the top. There's, I think in every single one of the show notes there's a link that you can sign up. The reason why I mentioned this is July had, what gear I spend a premium on and what gear I look for bargains, which I thought was kind of interesting as I looked back on that. Plus, a bonus segment in that on how I eliminated my saddle sore problems with 2 simple changes. So check out that if you have signed up for the newsletter. And like I said, if you haven't, you get things like that bonus podcast. You also get cool things like the semi-live, quasi-live feed when I record a new version of Tour Journals. It's all really fun and all really good. So go over and sign up at pedalshift.net for more cool content. All right, let's kick off this podcast by going to the journal. Flipping open the journal for episode 54. I've got a few things I wanted to talk about regarding my tours, both upcoming and past. And, of course, I'm going to be sort of flipping back to the journal later in the connection segment because there's a lot of folks who've been talking about the things that they're doing as well. I think I'm going to talk more about the future stuff. I'm starting to turn to next month and what I'm going to be doing in Oregon. I'm flying out at the end of August. I'll be out there basically the last full week of August. And I intend to do a portion of the coast. I wish I had enough time to do all the family visits and all the hangouts that I want to do and do the entire Oregon coast, but I just don't have that kind of time. Something's got to give. And I think that what I'm going to do is do something that I've never done before, and that is to do sort of a circular tour of the coast, or at least a portion of the coast that I'm going to be doing. Originally, I had thought about riding from Portland to the coast and then doing a bit of the coast and then riding back or doing some kind of quasi fast forward back. But I think I've decided that I want to maximize my time on the coast. And so I'm going to do the thing that I usually do, which is I take the Wave, it is called, cool name, for a bus that goes from downtown Portland to Tillamook, which is not the furthest northernmost point of the state of Oregon. That's generally speaking Astoria. I've ridden that portion of the coast. I've ridden all of Oregon before on the coast. But I think I'm going to be starting in Tillamook, which is kind of a base of operations for my starting because the bus is such a good way to get out there from Portland. And I'm going to do a southward tour. I may do a fast forward as a part of it and you utilize some of the transit options that are available, maybe even Lane County Transit. I haven't quite completely decided how I'm going to be doing that. I think that there's a lot to be said about just doing riding as far south as I can with the amount of time I've got, turning around and coming back. There's a lot of really good places that I can go to, and two of the places that I really love the most, of course, have to do with breweries. If you've heard me talk about the Oregon coast before, you've probably heard me talk about Pacific City, which typically is the first night that I tend to spend. I don't think I'll be spending the night there this go around, but I will definitely be stopping at the Pelican Bay Brewery, which is one of my favorite. I think it's Pelican Bay Brewing Company, actually, I should say. Reasonably decent beers, not like the most mind-blowing beers in the world, but I will tell you, it's the most mind-blowing sights ever, I think, for any kind of coastal brewery. It is fantastic. Love stopping there. So that's one place that I always love to go to. And the second place is the Rogue Brewery in Newport. And last go around, when I rode in Oregon, I missed out because I screwed up and thought that I was staying at the proper campsite. There's actually a campsite at South Beach State Park that you can do a quick off-road ride, a trail basically, that takes you essentially right to Rogue Brewing. And the book, The Pacific Coast, Cycling the Pacific Coast, tells you to stay at Bethany Beach, which is just 10 miles north of there. And I've always said for a long time that you're better off crossing the bridge and getting down to South Beach State Park and then having that as an option for you. Plus I think it's a nicer camping scenario. Both of them have hiker bikers. So if you can do the extra 10 miles, I always say, if you're going north to south, of course, you should definitely plan on staying there. So I think I'm going to be doing those two places, at minimum, of course, and I'm hoping to get much further south from there. I would love to get really far south and then basically take transit all the way back. That was originally what I was hoping to do. I think I shared this with Brock Dittus over at the Sprocket Podcast. There are ways to do some transit, all of which have bike racks and get northbound. But I think I'm short a day or two to really be able to take care of that. You can go down, I think, as far south as Brookings now, and do a combination of bike and transit northbound to really do a fast forward to get you back. There are a couple of spots where it's a really, I don't want to say dicey, but it's a very tight connection to be able to make at one of the points northbound. And I may share that as I delve into this, because part of me wants to try it, part of me doesn't, because if I do miss that connection, it basically means that I don't get back to Portland for a full day, or worse, I have to call my brother and say, yo, come out to the coast with a bike rack, which I hope not to do. So anyways, I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing a tour journals for this. It'll be a shorter one, of course. I believe I'll be biking probably 4 days, maybe 5. It depends on kind of how things go. And it'll be covering some similar aspects of past rides, but a couple of different things. Number one, time of year. August is not a time that I have ever done the Oregon coast before, so I'm kind of excited to hit it. Especially late August. I think it'll be a really interesting time. The weather is beautiful, gorgeous on the Oregon coast during this part of the summer. Winds are mainly from the northwest, which means as I go southbound, I'll largely have tailwinds the whole time. When I come northbound, however, I'll probably be going into the wind a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I think that connection that I talked about with one of the transit systems is a little tight to be able to pull off. It would be very, very, I have one big hill in there as well. If you go by the Google Maps, hey, everybody goes 10 miles per hour pace, of course I'd make it. However, I know me, and I know that sometimes I go a little slower up some of those hills. The fun part about doing the tour journals is, of course, if you're signed up for the newsletter, you get to follow along live. If not, it's always going to be archived. It'll be available in Pedalshift Plus down the line. So I think another aspect about the doing Oregon again is that I'll be riding my Oregon bike, my West Coast bike, as I like to call it, the Green Goblin. And I sort of hemmed and hawed on this. I think I talked about this on a past show, but when I was back there in February, I noticed that the bike was in really bad shape and really needed some TLC. And I knew it was going to be a major refurb and would be a few $100. And so I sort of thought, well, is this the end of having a West Coast bike? Because of course I had my Brompton and I can, fly my Brompton out. But there's some piece of me that really likes having a bike in Portland that I'm not bringing with me from the East Coast. It's sort of this psychological thing about having a presence there, outside of family, of course. But I really like having it, and it's cool. It's a vintage '90s era Novara Safari, which is the same bike that I ride a lot here. It's sort of my main touring bike. It's a little on the small side. It actually probably doesn't quite fit me, but I kind of like it, and I like riding it, and it's fun, and it's nice to have a fun vintage bike like that. So anyways, I've got that. I got it refurbed, did a whole new transmission on the whole thing, new everything, and I'm really excited to ride it. So that's one piece as well that I'll be riding on the Goblin again. It's just got kind of an Oregon thing written all over it. So that's kind of fun. The other thing that I'm thinking about doing is that I am going to be riding lighter, I think. One of the things that I've noticed in the kind of midsummer tours that I've been doing, especially on the C&O and the second leg of it, was that I really liked the fact that when I had a lot less weight on, I rode a lot faster. And I've always thought, weight doesn't make much of a difference. And frankly, it really does. So I'm looking forward to rethinking what I'm going to bring. I think I'm going to bring a tent. In fact, I know I'm going to bring a tent. I think I'm going to just really pare down on some of the essentials. I've lightened some of my gear, including the stove and things like that. So I'm going to really strongly think about eliminating everything that is just sort of a comfort item, and only starting with items that are necessary, items that I need to have, and go from there. And then maybe add a couple of comfort items at the very end. So I'll share all of that, of course, on the future episodes, because we've got at least one more, if not two more episodes before I'm going to be going on this fine excursion. So that'll be a lot of fun. One of the other things that I'm thinking is, although I am going to be riding the Goblin and intend to ride the Goblin, I'm sort of also thinking about bringing out the Brompton anyways. And the reason is that I love the fact that I live in Washington, D.C., and when I fly out of National Airport, which is just on the other side of the river in Arlington, Virginia, it's a very bikeable kind of ride from where I live. It's probably about a 40 to 45 minute ride from where I'm at. Of course, in Portland, it's also very close to the city center. And of course, my brother lives in Northeast Portland, so that's even better. I've ridden that a few times before, and I really like biking to and from the airport. So one of the other elements to all of this, in addition to going light, is, can I get the gear into a setup that I can pack on the Brompton, ride to the airport, take the Brompton and the gear on the plane, check one of the bags, get on the plane with the Brompton, get off the plane in Portland, pack everything back up, ride to my brother's house, and use the Brompton exclusively as my sort of transport from airport to home on both ends. That's something that I'm really attracted to. I'm not like kind of an anti-car person, and I like to go car free when I can, but this just feels like a fun challenge to be able to do, because I'm thinking that I'm not going to be bringing double panniers for this ride for the Goblin. So that gives me a little more freedom to be able to pull it all together. If you recall from my ride on the California coast in the spring, I had a backpack that attached to the rack in a way it's really interesting, with the dowel and all that, and how it's standing up. You can check out the feed on Instagram for an image of that recently too. I recently reposted another great image that I really liked of that, overlooking kind of the ocean around Big Sur. And you can really see how that backpack looks. I can use that as a way to kind of, in a sense, like luggage, if you will. I probably wouldn't use that backpack, because that isn't a good bag for touring on the Goblin or any other kind of traditional touring bike. So I'm thinking, can I get stuff into that backpack and still be able to bring the types of bags that I need to be able to ride on the Goblin? And I think that the answer is pretty clearly yes. If I was able to do it on the Brompton, I should be able to figure out ways to do it. Of course, it just really forces me to limit the amount of gear that I bring. So we'll have to see how all of that goes. I'm kind of excited to think this through as a thought experiment and be able to prove it by doing the car-free, cab-free, Uber-free kind of setup going to and from Portland. The one downside is I land in Portland after sunset on the day that I arrive, which would mean that I would have to bring lighting kit that maybe I wouldn't necessarily bring for the tour because I tend not to ride late enough at night. But, when I'm in Portland, I do tend to have some later nights and would need a light anyway. So we'll figure all of that out as we go along. So that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing. That's getting me excited for Portland and of course for the Oregon ride. And of course you can follow all along here on the show and on Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 7. I can't believe we're up to 7. That's crazy. Next up on the journal, I wanted to let everybody know, if you didn't, that the Pedalshift Guide to Biking the C&O Canal is starting to fill in a little bit more. I have, as of the time of this recording, 25 of the 31 videos up and ready to check out. I'm hoping to get the final 6 videos up and ready within a week or so. I've got some audio stuff that I really want to play with to make sure that that is all there. Next up, as I start to fill all of this in for those of you who are thinking about riding the C&O either this summer or this fall or perhaps even next year, or just want to follow along and see what I'm talking about with all of these campsites, I'm going to be putting up some swimming spots. I've got some information on that. I've talked about that on, I believe, last show. And I'm also going to be including some star reviews, like, 5 stars, 1 to 5 stars of various elements of each of these campsites. Things like scenery, are they flood prone, proximity to amenities, things along those lines. I'm hoping also to be able to find and make sure that I can have accurate information on cell phone signals, because that's a piece that I think can be really helpful if you're planning on a ride and want to be in touch or would like to be in touch or need to be in touch with the outside world after camp. There are a few sites where that's just not possible, depending on the carrier that you have. So I'm hoping to be able to find some good information on carrier access. What I've noticed is that the carriers themselves, their maps, well, they lie. They lie big time. So I'm going to try to be able to get as good information as I can. Worst case scenario, I got to go out and ride it again with a bunch of different cell phone brands, right? Boo-hoo. Anyways, go check that out. That's at pedalshift.net/C&O. Next up on the show is Gear Talk. And Gear Talk is, of course, when we talk about all the different types of things that we bring along on our tours. So first up, I have a follow-up on Schwalbe tires. If you were following on the last episode, you know that I had submitted a warranty request with Schwalbe for the tire fail that I had. If you weren't with us last episode, essentially what happened was the bead of the tire separated completely from the rest of the tire, and it wasn't like a slash, it wasn't like a cut, it was just sort of a fail. And I just thought, okay, well, maybe it's an older tire, although I was sort of like, I don't think they're supposed to do that. Mysterious James, friend of the show, suggested, hey, they've got a warranty page, you may want to check that out. Did that. And within 24 hours, they had responded while I was recording the last show. That's how quickly this all went. They said, yep, no problem. That is definitely a fail on the tire. That's covered under the warranty. That shouldn't happen. It's very rare. We're sending you a new one, sight unseen. Or, no questions asked, no nothing else. And I got it the other day. This is, a tire that retails in the $90 range for one of them. So they're not cheap. I'm very, very happy that they did this. I think that it's really a great example of standing by their products. I talked about this on the last episode. Sometimes it's good to spend a little bit of extra money on certain types of products because they really stand by them. Schwalbe is definitely doing that with this. I'm super thrilled that that's happened because I did go ahead and I bought a replacement for that rear wheel. I've got that in the back. Now I'm going to use this one to replace the front, and I'll keep that front one as sort of maybe a spare or one that I'll carry from time to time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the connection section, that I might carry that as a backup because it does fold down pretty well. That's it for the Schwalbe follow-up. Wanted to do a little bit of the review follow-up for some of the items that I used. I am trying to recall, I didn't really reuse the rain gear because there was no rain. I didn't bring the stove with me because I decided not to have that extra bulk, although it would have been quite minimal. And frankly, that morning I would have really liked a cup of coffee like in that moment instead of having to ride. I think it was it 20 miles? It was 15. No, it was 20 miles until I could get a cup of coffee. How did I manage to do that? Let's see. What else did I use? I did use the sweatbands hat. That worked out really well. I really enjoyed that. And I believe that's it. So most of the follow-ups on the reviews, not really relevant. I will let you know more about how all of those are going in the future. For this part of the gear talk, I wanted to talk a little bit more about tents. And I think I mentioned this on the last show that I would be doing this. And this is something that I guess I sort of have learned on the fly. It's information that I'd like to share. Just what do I look for in a good tent for bicycle touring? And I'm going to start by saying that I don't tend to do any real winter bicycle touring. I do by the calendar, technically, but for the most part, I don't have a really harsh winter until February around here in the Washington, D.C. area. So often I'm able to be doing some camping as really deep into November and December. Now, for many of you, that's the teeth of winter, even if it's not meteorologically, or it's meteorologically winter, but not astronomically. Nerd. Anyways, point being that I have a tent that I would characterize as a 3-season tent. I don't have a really good winter option. I don't know how much that would change what I've sort of fallen into and what I'm going to be talking about here, but 3-season tents. So we're talking spring, summer, fall. All right. The first lesson that I learned, and I talked about this on the bonus podcast on the newsletter, I don't need to spend a lot of money on a tent because I don't need the most ultralight backpackery, high-end tent. Caveat, I know people that do, and it's just like the tire situation. If your tent fails and, it's a warranty issue, then maybe you can get it replaced, repaired, et cetera, et cetera. So grain of salt with that. But in my experience, I haven't had to spend a lot of money on tents. The downside to that, of course, is sometimes you get a bad tent. And this is why, since I found a tent that I really like, I think what I've noticed is there are characteristics of a tent that's good for bike touring, whether it's expensive or not. And so the first thing that I wanted to say is you definitely want an independent rainfly, not one that's integrated in. I made the mistake at the dawn of bicycle touring for me when I went on the climate ride way back in the day. And I bought a brand new tent because the tent that I had was sort of a car camping tent and had very heavy fiberglass poles. I needed to replace it. It was old and needed replacing. And I replaced it with a tent that looked like it had good ventilation and it looked like it had all sorts of things. And then it said integrated rainfly. And I thought, well, that's awesome because now I don't have to deal with two separate things. And what I discovered is it ends up being a bad deal for you overall. Number one, an integrated rainfly, my experience, and man, did I get rained on that trip, is kind of a shitty rainfly. It doesn't really do a great job. You end up with the potential, if that fails, well, that's part of your tent and it's going to come in. And that's what I noticed with this particular tent. The other thing, and really almost more importantly, is those tents don't breathe very well. There's not enough air circulation. And when you're a warm body inside a tent where it's cool or raining outside in particular, I found I got a lot of condensation in that. And so the hallmark of a good tent is you want to make sure you have that separate rainfly, because what's that going to do? It's going to allow for air movement between the rainfly and the tent. And that's really, really critical to keeping yourself comfortable, whether it's cool weather or warm weather. sort of a caveat to all that, and the reason is, again, airflow, is I look for a tent that has mostly mesh, that ultrafine kind of no-seam mesh, and very little actual canvas, I will use as the word, even though of course it's not that. So in other words, you want material that is going to breathe really, really well and will maximize the amount of airflow that you have. And I find this to be the case to be true also during cold weather. It's good to have that because, again, cold weather, warm body, warm breath, you get condensation inside tents that are more fabric than sort of mesh. Again, I'm using non-technical words here. So when you're looking for any kind of a tent, don't think about, oh, well, that tent's going to be cold in the winter because it's all mesh. Think more about the fact that if it's not a lot of mesh, the fact that your breath is going to condense on the inside on a cold fall night and is going to drip down or get on stuff. I hate that myself. And when I moved to the tent that I'm using now and have used for several years, I made sure to get one that was almost completely all mesh. The only thing that's not mesh is, of course, the floor. And the flooring is an important piece as well. Another thing to look for is to make sure that it looks like a big cup or a bowl, if you will. Because what that means is that it's going to keep you dry if you get some splash up. And I'm here to tell you, during big rainstorms, you are going to get splash up. You would think no, especially with your rain fly down, but you would be surprised how much can actually splash up into the first few inches of your tent. And so making sure that your tent's got at least several inches, maybe even up to 4, 5, or 6 inches of a good bowl, if you will, then that's really important as well. Next thing that you should be looking for from a weight perspective, and I sort of ruined the moment by mentioning fiberglass poles before, is look for at least aluminum poles. I know that there are some very expensive tents out there that are going with titanium these days, and that's super, super freaking light, but also super freaking expensive. You may want to save those ounces if you're really, really trying to reduce weight. But I would say if you're really looking to reduce your weight that much, you're probably wanting to look at getting a bivvy instead. I found that aluminum poles are a good balance of durability and weight and strength and all the things. I've never had a problem with the ones that I have, and I've been very happy with them. So aluminum poles is probably something that I would recommend in the first instance, but I would stay away from things like fiberglass. That's sort of old technology and old school, and it's a hallmark of a less expensive tent. They are light, but they do tend to splinter over time, and I've had them break on me before. And of course, you don't want things to break on you. So that's poles. One other thing that I really, truly recommend, and this is something that is good for the longevity of your tent and a whole variety of good reasons, and that is to make sure that you get or make a tent footprint. Now, my tent that I have, and I believe I've mentioned this on the show before, it's Alps Mountaineering is the brand. I believe the tent was somewhere just above $100, and it has really served me quite well. I've really liked it. I don't know if other people have had similar experiences with the brand or not, but I've actually liked it quite a bit. I purchased a tent footprint that was designed by the manufacturer. You don't have to do that. It wasn't terribly expensive. I wish I could recall how much it was, but it was not very expensive. But I will say there are a lot of different opportunities out there. You can do it with just some 3mm sheeting. Painters use it for drop cloths and things like that. You can also use I think it's Tyvek, which is the stuff that they use on the sides of houses when they put up houses. You may even be able to, if you're friendly with somebody who is building a house, or if you can ask nicely a construction crew that is using it, they often have a lot of scrap. Basically, all you need to do is trace the outline of your tent, and that's it. When you were younger, perhaps, well, maybe I shouldn't begrudge you. When I was younger, the silly thing that we did was we'd get those big blue tarps and we would put them on the ground and they would stick way out. And we thought, oh, how smart we are. We can take off our shoes on this and not have our feet touch the ground and go inside the tent. Well, later you learn, of course, that during the rainstorms that inevitably come, the rain hits the blue tarp and goes underneath your tent completely getting rid of the entire reason why you have a footprint in the first place. One of the reasons you do that is to sort of keep the bottom of your tent somewhat dry during rain, although it's usually not completely going to do that. It'll at least help. But the big reason why you get that is so that you stop the grit and the nastiness from any of the campsites you have, whether it's sand or grass or dirt, straight up good old dirt, from getting on the bottom of your tent, because that's going to over time grind away at that bottom piece, the bottom of the tent, and reduce the lifespan of the tent. And that's the area that tends to go the most. So get a footprint, make sure it fits your tent, and go with that. You can cut it. You can use, like I said, use plastic sheeting, Tyvek, or something like that, and just use duct tape to piece it together as necessary. They can be really light. They ball up really small, and trust me, they really can be helpful for extending the life of your tent. Mine's been going strong for several years now, and has no reason to believe. I have no reason to believe that it's going to be going anytime soon. One other thing that I'd recommend that you do is to seam seal your tent. I would say every few years. When you get it brand new, usually it's going to be sealed up pretty good. But after a few seasons, that's going to wear off. And of course, there's just basically, it's a liquid application that you put along the seams, put them in places where it makes sense. Generally, it's going to be in the floor, on the corners in particular as necessary. Again, if you are using a footprint, that's going to help. If the tent is designed in a way so that the seams are not on the ground, like good tents are these days, then it's not going to have to be something that you do terribly often. But it is good to have, and it's good to do when you do notice if there is any kind of a leak in your tent at all. So those are the things that I recommend. One other element that I would say that's kind of on the nice side, if you are looking at a tent and you've got an option for different colors, I love me some orange, and I've got an orange tent, as many of you know. You've seen the pictures of it. Here's the thing. It's not the best for stealth camping or for wild camping if you're trying to have a low profile. So you may want to consider getting a tent with a rainfly and or its general look to be a little more blendy in the type of places that you're going for. So think about all those things. And let me know what you think, if you've got any other ideas and things you look for in tents. I'm here to tell you that you don't need to spend, $500 on a tent to have these things. You can get these types of things in a relatively inexpensive way, and you just need to know what to look for. But you want to have good airflow. You want to make sure you've got that separate rainfly. Make sure you've got at least aluminum poles. I think those work really well. You may want to replace the stakes that come with yours with something a little bit better. Often you get sort of these basic tent stakes and they just don't work really well. I've been fine with mine, but I know people like to replace theirs with something a little more sturdy or better. So that's, of course, all available. And just get out there and do it. Find the tent, borrow a tent, go to places that allow you to see the tents built up, good camping stores and REI, places like that. Spend a little bit of money, but you don't, like I said, I don't think you need to use this area as one where you throw a lot of money in order to be able to get out there and do it. And also for all of you first timers out there, don't let what tent you have be the limit. If you're intending to go out there and bike camp, use the tent that you've got. That first tent that I talked about, the one that I replaced before I went on my first bike tour, I actually did use it on an overnight, and it looked real silly, and it was enormous, and it was kind of not well suited for it. But you know what? I didn't let it stop me, and you shouldn't either. Borrow a tent, use the tent that you've used since you were a kid or whatever, throw that on your bike, bungee it down, and go for it. Try out stuff with the gear that you like, and then you'll know what you need and what you want. So hopefully this will be a bit of help here in the Gear Talk segment, and let me know if you've got any other thoughts on what you look for in tents. Next up is connections, and thank you all for getting in touch over the last few weeks. It's been awesome to just hear about all your different tours and all the things that are going on. I wanted to share a few of them that came across my email. You can email me, of course, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. You can reach out in the show notes. You can reach out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, hell, YouTube. I think I get emails on YouTube comments. I think I let you comment on YouTube. I don't know. I'll have to check that. But anyways, reach out. It would be awesome. First up, I wanted to talk about Rachel. Rachel sent me a note, and she is at humble.homestead.mt, and that is Humble Homestead, Montana. And she writes, I went on my first tour last week here in Montana. My partner and I rode about 260 miles to raise money for the Buffalo Field campaign. Check out the pics and a couple of stories over at her Instagram. Again, that's at humble.homestead.mt. And there's a couple of good pictures from that tour and really interesting photos nonetheless in all of that. But I just wanted to feature this because, Rachel, I'm so stoked that you went out and did your first bike tour, but you also linked it to something that was important to you. I think that's really cool. My first bike tour, as I mentioned, was for Climate Ride, and that's an important issue for me, climate change. So, I think that's really cool that you did that and you married those two things together. And 260 miles is nothing to sneeze at. And I know Montana can be pretty rugged country. So you are awesome. Thank you for sharing that with me. And everybody go check out her pictures over at humble.homestead.mt on the gram. Harry Telegatus. Harry, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. That's sort of like the theme of my show. What is this, 54 episodes and I mispronounce names and places? It's what I do. Anyways, Harry writes and shares his tour about his experience on the Great Allegheny Passage, the Gap. That's the trail that goes from Cumberland all the way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he writes, in early May, I rode a 3-day, 2-night ride from Connellsville to Pittsburgh and returned. It's a very easy ride with many views and a nice afternoon in Pittsburgh. I thought your listeners might find it appealing, especially new riders. So here is Harry's itinerary. And Harry, by the way, has been with us since the very beginning. So friend of the show, Harry. Day 1. Car ride from DC to Connellsville, and he says, reports there's good secure parking there. And that is, I can definitely attest to that. The spot, it's behind the Martin's grocery store, and Connellsville has a really great setup. And I've talked about this on the show and on the tour journals. They've got Adirondack shelters back there. So you can camp there and be in the Adirondack shelter. Don't have to even pitch a tent if you don't want to. And you've got the store literally right there. So you can have a feast. Trust me. And I think they even have grills too. So if you wanted to grill out, you can do that too. So anyways, so day 1, Harry parks at Connellsville. He rides from Connellsville to, here we go. Is it Dravo? The Dravo Campground and Camp. All you Pittsburgh people are going to be proud of me for saying Dravo properly. Now, Dravo is a nice ride. That is, if you recall, if you're a Gap fan, it is the last campsite. It's about mile marker 20 or 25, if I am not mistaken. That is on the way towards Pittsburgh. So it's a good, solid ride, but a good, fun ride as well. So, and it's also, I think, one of the best campgrounds, I think, on the entire Gap. I think it's really great. Actually, that and Connellsville, those are my two favorites, I think. So good linkage. Day 2, leave Dravo, but leave the setup there and use a day pack to ride into downtown Pittsburgh. Harry reports that he stayed on the south side and had lunch and a nap, and then he returned to Dravo. So I think that's a really cool idea. I think I've done that on the C&O before, where you stay for 2 days at a campsite. Many places allow you to stay upwards of 2 days. Some, you may want to check on that. For other places, I know that Dravo allows this. I think they allow 2 days according to the sign. You want to make sure that you're not violating anything. Also, some people might not feel comfortable leaving their stuff. Dravo, I know, was kind of away from a lot of stuff, and it's a Boy Scout camp. So if anybody's stealing from Boy Scout camps, then they have a special place in hell reserved for them. So, and Harry obviously reports that this worked out for him. So awesome. And that's also really cool because you get a chance to see Pittsburgh, but you don't have to look for a place to stay in Pittsburgh because you're close enough to do a day ride, enjoy it, and then come back, and then you're set for camp. That's awesome. Day 3, Harry went from Dravo Campground, packed up, and went to Connellsville, and then his car was awaiting them, and he drove home from there. So that's an awesome ride, and that's a really great section of the Gap. Harry says, not the most epic ride, but I like the sections in Pittsburgh for raw industrial views, and it's very different from most rail trails. I agree. I think it's a great ride, and I wouldn't poo-poo that. That's real riding and real miles, and I think it's maximizing a short time. You're getting 2 nights, and you're getting 3 fun days of riding, and it's something that I think I would definitely agree that this is a good one for beginners, because you only have to set up camp. Let's see. I guess you would go yeah, you would only have to do one setup and one takedown because you're only camping at Draveau. Now you could, if you wanted to, especially if you were coming later in the day and you were driving from DC to Connellsville or wherever you're at going to Connellsville and you end up getting there at night, you could spend the night there and then start in earnest the next day. But the great part, as I had mentioned, there are Adirondacks there, just like there are at Draveau. And you won't even have to pitch a tent necessarily, assuming that they're not all full. So that's really great. The other thing, Harry had a lot of cool stuff to say in his email to me. He's big on foam earplugs and carrying a spare tire with him, and that's a callback, the spare tire, to what I'm going to be doing with my now extra. I wouldn't call it extra. I mean, I guess I paid for it, but the older tire that was on the front. I am going to, I think, after some gentle chiding from Harry, which I agree with, that you probably should consider carrying a spare tire when conditions warrant. And so on a ride where I know I'm going to be going for long stretches without having access to a bike shop or any other kind of options for getting a replacement, it's kind of cheap insurance. So that's something that I'll probably do as well. Foam earplugs, Harry, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I'm not a big earplug sleeper, except when I'm on bike tour and except when the air conditioning keeps me awake like it did last night here at home. So I keep my camping earplugs near the bed during summers because I always find it to be a little bit too noisy overall. So yes, foam earplugs are, I think, I wouldn't call them a must, but I would say that you should consider having something like that in your kit, especially for your sleep kit. So I've got a picture in the show notes of Harry's setup. You should check that out. It's a really great setup. Harry likes red, as I can tell. And thanks, Harry, for sharing all that with us. Last but not least, we've got Scott Gilbert, who says aloha from Hawaii. And aloha back to you, Scott. He shares his folding bike touring setup. Now, Scott's got a Bike Friday, which is, if I'm not mistaken, an American-made brand, a very well-regarded brand. It's usually mentioned in the same breath as Brompton. They're made in the Pacific Northwest. I want to say that they're made in Oregon. I'm going to have to check on that. But yes, Bike Friday, definitely Northwest brand. The cool thing that stood out to me when Scott sent in the look of his rig was his trailer. And as I looked a little bit closer, and you can actually see the same pictures that he sent me, link in the show notes, of course, over at pedalshift.net/054, it is his actual hardshell Samsonite luggage. And it converts into a trailer. And if you look real closely, you'll notice that it can hold all of his stuff. So he doesn't have a pannier on his bike. I take that back. No, he has one pannier on the rear of the bike, but he's also got the trailer as well. So a lot of capacity, nothing on the front. I don't believe Bike Fridays have that luggage block like Bromptons do. So it's more in the back. But the best part about that is keeping the weight off of the bike. So that makes things a little bit easier. Of course, you've got the extra drag with the trailer. There's all the pros and cons of having a trailer, but you can fly so easily with that. And he sent some beautiful pictures of, I believe, a European trip. Am I crazy here? Yes, it must have been. And what's great is the bike and all the components of the trailer fit inside that Samsonite case. So when you go to the airport, you can ride to the airport, which is great. Something I intend to do for the next trip, I hope. And get your bike and everything into that hardshell. Check that. And when you get back, you just unload everything, put together the trailer, and remove your bike, put it all together, and you're all set. And then you've got capacity to put stuff in. So that could be maybe on a second carried bag or something that could fit in the pannier along those lines. I love this. I love this idea. It's a really great setup. Check out the show notes for this. I think it's a really, really good way to go. Something I considered for the Dayhan, I believe, when I had that. But then I was going to be cheap and thought that, oh, wait, I can use an existing bag that I have. And of course, it didn't work. But then I wasn't too bright, and I thought I could get my bike apart and take off the wheels in a way that it would fit in. And all I did was screw up the whole bike and had to take it into the shop. Whoops. Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. Do something like Scott does. Be smart and have a setup that actually works. That hardshell Samsonite looks like a really good way to do it. So go check it out. Pictures in the show notes for that. And thanks everybody for writing in and sharing all your stuff. I just love seeing everyone's tour. Of course, the 3 tours that I've been following this summer, I should mention, although I don't have them in the show notes in front of me, Patience finished her ride in Boston, and I know that that was a really big deal for her. It was a tribute to her friend, so congratulations on finishing that ride. It looked really, really great. And let's see, Michael is, I believe he's in Wyoming. Oh, in fact, I know he's in Wyoming. He is in Yellowstone National Park right now, dodging RVs as we speak. So that's going to be great. I hope he's having a good ride. So he's getting closer. It's another few weeks, and he'll be back home in Portland, and I think he's intending to finish off at the coast. I'm not sure about that. I should ask him. And of course, Three Girls on a Bike, they're still chugging along, and hopefully next month I'll be getting in touch with them. In fact, I may be trying to get in touch with everybody, maybe get them all on the show, because it's been fun to follow their tours as we go along. So I hope you're following along on other tours as well. This is great. This is fun. It's almost as fun as riding. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.